All right. So, with the overthrow of the Sui dynasty in 618, you now have the establishment of what's known as the Tang dynasty. Now, something to remember about the Tang is that they are not the typical ethnic Chinese. You know, we talked about how the Han establish um, centuries earlier the people and the culture and the land of China. Well, the Tong are not a group of people that come from that traditionally ethnic Chinese. The Tong are actually the descendants of those northern nomads who overcame the Great Wall, started conquering and settling in areas in northern China, and established their own small kingdoms. So the Tong are actually descendants several generations removed of some of these northern nomads. So they are less traditional Han Chinese and they are more warlike, more militaristic, more expansive. Um, they know Chinese, they speak Chinese, they write Chinese. However, they don't consider themselves the traditional Chinese dynasty. So they're going to do things a bit differently than what you would see under the Han or what we're going to see in the next dynasty under the Sung. So the Tong, being as they are, descendant from these northern nomads, they continue to focus on economic and military expansion. However, they realize that economic and military expansion, building infrastructure, building a bureaucracy costs money. And it behooves them to understand that that's what got the Sui overthrown as well. So, in order to maintain popularity while still being able to, tax the population, fight the wars that they want to fight, um, the Tong reach out to the spiritual and the religious community in order to help build their popularity base, to build mass appeal for their dynasty and for their ruling class. Specifically, they appeal to the Taoists and they appeal to the Buddhists. And you got to remember that during this time, right? This is still an age where the teachings of Confucian have been discredited. They have been ignored for several hundred years, and Buddhism is on the rise. So, in order to, kind of latch on to that rising popularity, the Tong openly support Buddhism and Buddhist temples all over China. Buddhist temples are given tax exemptions. Buddhist monks and Buddhist philosophers are invited to the capital. They're celebrated. They work as advisors to the emperor. And essentially, the Tong use Buddhism as kind of a crutch to help prop up their popularity while they continue to do essentially the same things as the Sui. They continue to fight wars, they continue to use forced peasant labor, they continue to charge high taxes. But because of their popularity in the religious community, these things are more accepted by them. Um, Now, here's something that you need to remember also. This is not the first or the last time that this kind of thing has happened. The relationship between the Tang dynasty and the Buddhist temples and the Buddhist merchants in and along the Silk Road is a very common occurrence. We talked in the early units about how early rulers used religion to justify their authority. We're going to talk in the next unit about how the Roman Catholic Church and several barbarian Germanic tribes in Europe ally and work together. We talked about how Islam was able to spread so far and so fast, partially because there was no separation between church and state. And that is a theme that you guys have got to be aware of, and you've got to be able to notice on your own also in terms of the reading in each of these units. is the very close relationship between religion and government, and how these two aspects of society generally work together very well, and that it tends to be a very positively symbiotic relationship where both sides benefit mutually from that relationship. And that's going to be a theme again and again and again, and something that you guys want to pay attention to. Now, with the support of the Buddhists, the Tong can now set out on their mission of expansion. And so they begin several wars in Central Asia. Mainly, they wish to expand their control over the Silk Road. They want to subdue the Turks in Central Asia and to ensure that that border with that part of the world is very secure. Um, However, it's not just to the west that they want to expand. The Tang also begin expanding their political reach to the north and to the south. And this is the beginning of what we call the tribute system. Okay. Now, the tribute system is an important part of Chinese history because it signifies and it makes official China's dominant position with its other neighbors. Okay. Um, so in this tribute system, other states like Korea, like Japan, like Vietnam, even the even the Abbasid Caliphate, all the way from Baghdad, sends people to participate in this tribute system. So what it creates are what we call vassal states. These are other states, other kingdoms who agree in part of this tribute system that they are subordinate to China and to its glory and to its greatness. In some cases, it even creates protectorate states, which are essentially independent states who are protected by and under the influence of the Chinese military. Now, the way that this tribute system works is foreign rulers travel to China, and they perform this very ritual ceremony known as the kowtow, where they present the emperor with valuable goods, tribute from their homeland. They bow, they beg, they essentially must lie on the floor and kind of just bask in the greatness of the emperor and all things Chinese. And in return for this, they get, political recognition from the emperor, which is important. If you're a smaller neighbor of China, you want to make sure that China is happy with you. If they're not happy with you, you are risking your independence and your power and your kingdom by angering them. But the most important thing that any of these foreign states get out of this is they are allowed trade rights within China. And at the end of the day, that is what everyone wants. And that is going to be a theme all the way up until the 1900s. Foreigners coming to China want to trade. Okay. They don't come for the culture or the food or the art or the music or any of that. What they come for is the ability to trade. And the reason that they want to trade in China and are desperate in many cases to trade in China is because China is the world's biggest economy. Okay. They have the world's largest population. They're one of the most efficient manufacturing states. They are one of the largest producers of foodstuffs, specifically rice. So gaining access to Chinese markets is essential for economic growth for these smaller states who don't have the massive population that China does. Right? Now, one of the side effects of this tribute system is the introduction of what's known as champas rice into southern China. Champas rice is brought to China as tribute from the Champas region of Southeast Asia, which is now part of modern day Vietnam. And the important thing to know about Champas rice, and Champas is one of the most important food products in human history. Champas rice requires less water to grow, which is important. That frees up resources for other things. But even more important is that it grows twice as fast as the rice that is native to southern China, meaning that you can have two harvests a year rather than just one. And that has big implications. Two harvests a year means twice as much rice. Twice as much rice means you can feed twice as many people. And you can see that this obviously takes place over a period of about 600 years. The population within China quadruples from 50 to 200 million people. For the 13th century, 200 million people is absolutely insane. That's more people than live in Europe, North America, and South America combined at that point. Okay. That is an absolutely insane number. And this is part of the reason why trade with China is so incredibly important, because that kind of population needs a constant source of consumer goods, luxury goods, trade goods, foodstuffs. Okay. And they purchase those things from all around Asia, right? Again, this is the biggest economy in the world. And it basically will remain that way again, all the way up until the middle of the 1900s when communism wrecks things, right? Now, with this massive increase in population, obviously people need somewhere to live. So urbanization intensifies. Cities grow at incredible rates. Um, by the year one, in the year 1000 CE, 12 of the 15 biggest cities on the planet were all in China. So that should give you an idea of what we're talking about with this urbanization. Now, again, because of the increase in agricultural production, labor specializes dramatically. They can grow more food with less people, meaning that those people who formerly needed to be agricultural workers can now move into industries and their own businesses. So economic production soars, more goods are being made, there's more things to buy, there's more things to trade. Okay. And so this opens Chinese borders to a massive influx of trade. Their connections with India, with Southeast Asia, with the Muslim world and the Abbasid Caliphate intensify dramatically. Chinese goods start to be pushed out into every corner of the Asian continent, right? Now, with this surge in economic production, it also forces technical innovations to keep up with the economic production. Basically, under the Tang Dynasty, China completely reinvents economics and the financial industry. Because of the amount of trade and the amount of economic production that's going on in China, the Chinese are forced to start printing paper currency. And the reason for this is because there is literally not enough precious metal to go around. There is not enough silver, there is not enough gold, there is not enough bronze in China to trade to be able to keep up with how much economic productivity is going on. There literally is not enough gold in circulation to keep up with the amount of exchange that's happening. So the Chinese begin printing paper currency. They also develop the concepts of banks. They also develop the concepts of credit during this time. Um, the Tang Dynasty begins requiring its people to pay taxes in cash instead of labor and goods. So no longer can Chinese peasants pay their taxes with rice or with some other, food stuff that they've produced. They have to sell their product and then pay their taxes in cash. So this further encourages trade and further encourages specialization, the growing of cash crops, all of these things. The Tang Dynasty really drives economic progress, not only in China, but all over Asia, because these technical innovations like paper currency, like banking, like the extension of credit, these things diffuse out of China along these trade routes and are put into practice all over the Indian Ocean and all over the Silk Road. Now, politically and culturally, the Tong are, like we said, they're not traditional Han Chinese, but they also recognize the need to create an efficient government and bureaucracy. So they slowly begin to revive the examination system that was created under the Han, to help manage this expanding population and this expanding economy. And they take the Han system and they actually begin to build on it and expand upon it. And they create 6 ministries to handle the different parts, the different aspects of the empire, each one with 3 departments each. And this is essentially the system that would stay in place in China all the way up until the end of the Ming Dynasty, which comes crashing down in the very, very early 1900s, right? Now, here's the thing is as China grows in terms of population, as they grow politically, as they grow economically, as the empire becomes bigger and more difficult to manage, the Tong begin to realize that they need to begin borrowing more and more from the traditional Han method of ruling China. So as their situation stabilizes, the country begins to grow and become wealthier and more powerful, the Tong need a way to maintain and establish order. And we all know in China, if you're trying to establish and maintain order, all of that goes back to the teachings of Confucius. So over time, around the 7th and 8th, well, probably 8th and 9th century CE, Confucius and his teachings and his ideals begin to reassert themselves. The Tang become more open to traditional Chinese methods of management. They become more open to the culture and the way of life that was established under the Han. And with the resurgence in Confucianism, Buddhism begins to fall out of favor. Because again, the Tong, for the most part, really only appealed to Buddhism because they needed that support to stabilize and build their popularity. By the 8th and 9th century, they're well established. They no longer need Buddhism the way that they did before. So Buddhism starts to fall out of favor. The government begins to persecute Buddhist monasteries and Buddhist temples. It removes their special privileges, things like being tax exempt. It begins to seize the land and the money of these Buddhist temples. So this is all part of Buddhism's roller coaster ride through Asia. It enjoyed several hundred years of growth and popularity, under the early Tong. It enjoys state support, which really, enriches it. And over time, that popularity began to erode and things begin to kind of fall off a cliff for Buddhism. And now they are, unfavored by the government, and, they're going to have to adapt, which we'll talk about later. Now, the Tong, for all of their expansion and for all of the economic prosperity that happens, their downfall is political. So there are several failed wars that the Tong fight. There's a failed invasion of Vietnam. There's a very important battle in 751 that they lose to the Abbasid Caliphate, which, allows the caliphate to essentially push them out of Central Asia. There's a number of rebellions by military governors. One in particular is known as the An Lushan Rebellion. And not only does this weaken the military, but this weakens the Tong's control over their empire. Like we said, they lose control over Central Asia, meaning that they lose control over the Silk Road. Um, in some years, they're actually forced to pay tribute to the Turks to ensure that the Turks won't close the Silk Road and that China can still have access to it. These big tribute payments essentially bankrupt the Tong, and eventually in 907, the dynasty collapses.